Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on what time zone you're in here. Thank you for joining us for the latest edition of our On Track Live webinar. We're excited today to have Michelle Bloodworth with us. Michelle is doing some amazing work in defending coal, and she'll have some things to present to us in a minute. Just cover a couple of things. This session is being recorded because we have a lot of folks who are chiming in later to watch the recordings when this time doesn't work for them. That's always an option that's available to you. Also, this is once we get into the presentations here, feel free to use the chat box. I'll be watching that for any questions or comments that come along. We'll get started. Let's real quick before we turn to our guest speaker, I'd like to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion for NCTA here. Mark your calendar. We'll keep doing these On Track Live webinars every third Wednesday at 11:30 Mountain. We've got sponsorships available for this enterprise. Contact Melinda if you're interested in any of that action. We won't do an On Track Live next month. Because it will overlap our 49th annual business meeting and conference down in Colorado Springs. A couple of highlights of that conference: we will be having on the Wednesday that week, we will be doing a special tour of the Federal Railroad Administration's Transportation Technology Center. That's that picture down there on the bottom. They've got all kinds. This is where they crash trains and stuff to show how things are, but they'll go over all the test conditions that we have down there. It's about an hour south of the meeting venue, so transportation will be provided for folks who want to do it, and it'll just be that Wednesday morning.
Hey John, also, can you full screen? I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you full
I'm sorry, I thought I did full screen and I'm not paying attention, so let's get her up there again. Thanks, Melinda. There we go. And the other keynote address that we've announced at our fall meeting last year, one of our most popular speakers was a retired Navy SEAL. Those of you who are there and listened, got really good reviews on him. I found another retired Navy SEAL. This one, John McCaskill, has quite a story to tell, and that's his logo down there on the bottom right. He does Frogman Mindfulness. So it should be a very interesting presentation, and we look forward to everybody joining us down in Colorado Springs. Registration is open. Contact Melinda if you've got any problems. There's still some sponsorships available for that as well if you'd like to go. There's a couple other program notes. The RailLink webinar is still in the works by the O&M committee. We'll probably have a date for you on that. It'll probably be after the fall meeting. And our latest NCTA on-time performance survey is out in the field now. This survey period will cover the first 6 months of 2023. We do this survey twice a year in cooperation with the Freight Rail Customer Alliance and the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. We urge people to please participate even if your rail service is improving. We want to capture that information. So far, response rate has been pretty good. We've got more power plants participating already in this survey than we did in the last one, but we don't have as many participating as we did in the one before that. So some of you out there may still have to get back with us on this. If you're having trouble, some utilities, because of the firewalls, have trouble with the SurveyMonkey interface. If that's giving you fits, contact Melinda. She can provide you a hard copy way to input your data for the survey, but we really appreciate that. It's been a tremendous help in discussions with the Surface Transportation Board and other policymakers as we've dealt with some of the rail issues that have been out there for the past couple of years. So if you haven't already, please participate. On that line of participate even if your rail service is improving, we are expecting to see some improvement in some regions. Some other utilities and suppliers are continuing to experience difficulties. A couple of the coal producers on their quarterly earnings calls were lamenting that they've still been having some service issues from the railroads. But we've also had some utilities reporting that things are getting better. Those are copies of a couple of letters there, one from Associated Electric Cooperative and another one from Consumers. that have been filed with the STB indicating that rail service is getting better. So hopefully this next survey period will show a mixed bag rather than just a kind of a bad bag, which is what we've been experiencing for a little while here. The other quick news update since our last gathering, probably the biggest thing going on that affects coal world right now is the Surface Transportation Board. You recall back in June, they granted a preliminary injunction requiring BNSF Railway to deliver a large amount of coal for Navajo Transitional Energy Company for export. As BNSF requested a stay on that order, the STB just rejected that last week. BNSF also challenged the STB action in court. That's all around the emergency service order that STB issued. But STB has also set up a hearing in a separate manner on NTEC's common carrier complaint against BNSF. And this will be a really interesting thing to watch, that common carrier obligation, which railroads have, but is not very well defined, and STB's ability to do anything with it, which is not very well defined. I expect that'll all play out in these proceedings over the next several months here. So we'll be keeping our eye on that. The other big news since our last On Track Live is that Union Pacific has named its new CEO to replace Lance Fritz, who is departing. Jim Vena took the office at Union Pacific just last week. Mr. Vena is a 40-year UP veteran and was a chief operating officer when UP did most of their work to implement precision scheduled railroading. You'll recall some of the other railroads that have had CEO changes recently, most notably CSX, have looked outside the rail industry for some CEOs. Union Pacific did the opposite and chose an insider who is steeped in the PSR implementation. In coming on board, he announced plans to be more customer focused and that sort of thing, but the appointment did receive some mixed reactions, including some criticism from the labor unions. So we'll keep you updated on all of that kind of stuff in our digital version of the On Track newsletter. Keep watching there for more news. So there's your news update. I'd like to keep it brief today and get right to our guest speaker because they've got some great information to share with us. America's Power is one of the most active advocates for coal electricity in the country. And I won't do spoiler alerts and share what we're and I won't do any spoiler alerts on what they're up to. But our special guest today is Michelle Bloodworth. Michelle is president and CEO of America's Power. Has a tremendous background, actually beginning her career as a power plant engineer after graduating from Auburn University. So she understands power plants. She's worked there. She's worked for the natural gas industry. She's worked for MISO, one of the grid regulators. And so kind of an ideal background for addressing the kind of grid reliability issues that are really rising to the forefront now that we've had premature closures of too many coal plants around the country. So with that bit of introduction, let me stop sharing my screen and introduce Michelle Bloodworth. And Michelle, I believe you've got a screen to share too, and kind of walk us through what you got to say today.
I do. So first I wanted to start off by John, thanking you certainly for this opportunity. There are a lot of certainly critical and important issues facing the power grid, as many of you I'm sure are acutely aware of, and we really have appreciated the opportunity to continue our collaboration. I think we're both focused on ensuring that we continue to deliver affordable, fuel secure, and reliable electricity to all Americans. And so for that, I thank you very much. It would be an understatement for me to say that there hasn't been a lot that has changed since the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed about a year ago. We have before us, certainly the coal industry and the power industry, an onslaught of environmental regulations that are not flexible. They're certainly going to cost millions of dollars. And we think not just us, but a lot that I'll talk about of other electricity experts are really concerned about the impact, the cumulative impact of those regulations on the coal fleet and on reliability, given the many challenges that are facing the grid transition, whether that's time, technology, or also transmission. So certainly we have a bumpy road ahead. For those of you who may not be familiar with America's Power, as John said, we're the only national trade association who is solely focused on coal electricity and also its supply chain. We are working both from a federal and a state perspective to basically avoid the premature retirement of coal plants. We're seeing a lot of coal plants that are being prematurely retired before the grid can really sustain the loss of those attributes and the loss of that capacity, which I'll talk about in a minute. According to NERC, who is responsible for managing the reliability of the bulk power system, in their recent summer reliability assessment going into this summer, basically they are showing, and I've identified that 2/3 of the country is at an elevated risk of blackouts. One of those main reasons is because of the accelerated pace of the loss of dispatchable resources, primarily coal, some natural gas, but primarily coal, in a very short period of time. In August of last year, America's Power sent NERC, we work very closely with NERC, we have a good relationship with NERC, where we had sent them some analysis that we felt like they had underestimated the amount of coal retirements by 4-fold. Obviously, the forecast and the reliability, whether it's annual, summer, winter, they all send signals to the market as to new entry, what is going to be built, what's going to be retired, different market reforms that are going to be needed to retain necessary attributes. We were pleased in their recent reliability assessment that NERC did increase that number to about 88,000. We had estimated about 100,000 because ours also includes the impact of EPA regulations, which NERC does not. But it was really good news that certainly, and that's one of the reasons why you're seeing that 2/3 of the country is at elevated risk of blackout. Jim Robb, the CEO of NERC, was on a panel with me recently, and he basically told a lot of state utility commissioners that he saw the situation, the entire country being at risk, unless we do something to slow down the pace of the loss of dispatchable resources until other technology and other resources, whether that's long duration battery storage, advanced nuclear, CCUS. We've got about 6 members that are developing different projects as it relates to CCUS. We also released a report on Storm Elliott, really looking at the performance of all the generation resources, which really overwhelmingly makes the case for why we still need coal, especially during periods of extreme weather. It's hard to beat 90 days of on-site fuel versus natural gas, which is certainly just in time. During Storm Elliott, and you can see the same for Storm Uri, coal provided in MISO, which is the largest grid operator in the Midwest. It houses the most capacity as it relates to coal. It provided 37% of the increased electricity demand on December the 23rd and the 24th. In PJM, it provided 50% of the electricity demand. We have spoken about grid reliability, our concerns over the pace of retirements, the importance of the attributes of the coal fleet, both to EPA themselves. We've talked to FERC, we've talked to Congress, NARUC. We spend a lot of time in these wholesale electricity markets and also with state utility commissioners, because they certainly have a significant voice as it relates to the approval of the retirement of dispatchable resources, and certainly as it relates to new generation and new build. We've also been working a lot with the grid operators to share our analysis as it relates to these 6 environmental rules. We've done a lot of analysis on looking at what type of environmental controls, the age of the coal units, which units are at risk of retirement. We were really pleased that 4 of the RTOs, which cover more than 30 states, MISO, SPP, ERCOT, and PJM, as it relates to the most outrageous rule, I would call it, the carbon rule, which pretty much puts every coal plant at risk of retirement by 2032 or even sooner because of the requirement of carbon capture and storage, which is about $2 billion for each coal plant. It also impacts natural gas. But the grid operators did provide very strong comments. They talked about the material and adverse effects if EPA finalizes the rule in its current form. They also talked about that hope is not an acceptable strategy as it relates to CCS because there isn't but one project, Petra Nova, which was mothballed and recently brought back online, that even has carbon capture and storage, but it does not meet the capture rate that the carbon rule requires. And what's different today than, I would say, when the MATCH rule, the mercury and air toxic rule, came around in 2011, that was just one rule. We have 6 rules all coming at us at one time that are either going to be, that have in the process of being revised or finalized between now and the end of the next administration, which really are designed to eliminate not just coal, but also all fossil fuels. The grid operators right now, one of the largest issues they're facing is accredited capacity. So even though there's a significant amount of solar and wind, small amounts of battery storage being brought online, it is not able to keep up with the pace of the loss of dispatchable resources. Coal and also natural gas has the capacity accreditation value of about 90%. So if you have these grid operators, if you have 1,000 megawatt coal plant, then you're basically relying that when you need that, when demand peaks, then basically 900 megawatts you can rely on. If you're a wind plant, then you're 1,000 megawatt wind farm, then PJM is only relying on 170 megawatts. And certainly, as Claire Moeller, the CEO of MISO, and the CEO of NERC are all saying, a megawatt of coal, gas, nuclear is not the same as a megawatt of wind and solar. It doesn't mean that America's Power is opposed to wind and solar, but obviously they're intermittent generation, and we're still going to need those resources until we have long duration battery storage or other resources to basically fill the gaps, either when those resources like natural gas are too expensive or they're also just not available. The picture is also, which is even more scary, all these grid operators import and export. Certainly that was what happened during Storm Uri and also Storm Elliott. As we look at PJM and MISO, half of the coal fleet by 2030, this is aside from the EPA regulations, is proposed to retire. But PJM also released a report similar to MISO's, and they're also facing the same problem. PJM also, there was an article today in S&P Global that PJM is going to be hit the hardest if the carbon rule is finalized. And even the 40,000 megawatts that PJM has estimated that it can lose, and it will have a capacity shortfall, certainly an elevated risk of blackouts beginning in 2027 is only going to get worse because that analysis does not take into account the impacts of the carbon rule. And that's why these grid operators, which certainly are going to have a lot of weigh-in, it's hard to argue against people who are electricity expert with the Environmental Protection Agency over their concern with that rule. And they've also weighed in on other rules like the coal combustion residual rule. As it relates to the coal fleet, you can certainly see that in 12 years ago, 2011, the coal fleet sat at about 317,000 megawatts. In 2023, we're at about 188,000 megawatts. Already 80,000 megawatts has publicly announced, we track coal retirements very closely and have for years, has announced retirement by 2030. According to EPA's own regulatory impact analysis contained in their supplemental technical files on the carbon rule, they're basically showing the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act and also the impact of the carbon rule. They're basically showing that the coal fleet would practically be little or nothing in 2035. And that is what has a lot of these grid operators and NERC extremely concerned. And that's why they're also pushing back pretty strongly as it relates to, we've got to put reliability first. We are seeing after MISO CEO and even PJM CEO make really strong statements to their utilities. We have seen about 23 utilities and also more of those are investor-owned utilities push back retirement dates for reliability reasons. And we hope that we will continue to see that trend. We're certainly using all of the vehicles that we can as it relates to these environmental regulations to ensure that we have sensible regulations, but that also delegate authority back to the states instead of basically taking that authority and giving it to the federal government and to the EPA. One of those, unfortunately, is litigation. As it relates to the ozone transport rule, there are about 21 states who are involved, attorney generals, in either seeking motions to stay, which would put the ozone transport rule, which would require very expensive controls and result in about a quarter, that one rule of the coal fleet retiring by 2027, 2028, or even sooner. We also have filed litigation with several other co-ops and other trade associations. The good news is, surprisingly, as our attorneys tell us, the state AGs have been very successful in seeking motions to stay. So 11 of the states impacted by the ozone transport rule have been awarded by district courts a motion to stay, which basically pauses that regulation until the litigation is complete. And that's what we're asking for the federal implementation plan, and hope to hear back within the next 30 to 60 days. As it relates to appropriation riders, we're certainly looking at that vehicle. There are several folks in Congress who are also looking at that vehicle. However, it will be based on whether we have a new presidential administration. If we do, then those can be used to roll back regulations that have been finalized at least within 160 days or 180 days of the new administration taking over. That's what we saw with the original version of the Obama Clean Power Plan. We're also looking at resolutions of disapproval. The Oversight Committee in the House, we were successful in a resolution being passed, which would basically defund the EPA from finalizing the carbon rule. Also looking at the ozone transport rule. Certainly it'd have to pass the Senate, which will be a heavy lift. Which would pause that rule until reliability analysis has been done. We're also looking at several types of federal legislation. We've been working with both the House and the Senate as it relates to two pieces, components of the permitting reform, and we were glad to see that Senator Barrasso incorporated those into the SPUR Act. One of those, as I mentioned, it would require that all federal agencies would be required to do reliability analysis before any regulations are finalized. The other piece of legislation that we've been advocating for the past couple of years is the other component of the SPUR Act would require FERC to give the grid operators a timeline for defining valuing and then compensating grid attributes that are going to be necessary, like essential reliability services, and also including things like fuel security, which certainly is becoming a lot bigger issue. I'll talk about some more changes to EPA rules. As I mentioned, we do spend a lot of time on market reforms. We spend a lot of time with SPP, MISO, and PJM because that's the majority of where the coal fleet is housed. A lot of probably the two biggest market reforms that we're focused on in those three grid operators is getting accreditation right. Right now, PJM is looking, when they're looking at solar, obviously the more solar that comes online, the capacity value of solar goes down significantly. They are looking at lowering the accredited capacity value of solar in the wintertime to about 1%. They're also looking at lowering, given a lot of the fuel security issues with natural gas, they're also looking at lowering the accreditation value of natural gas in the wintertime, which will also help coal because it will send a signal that prices will probably go up, meaning a lot of revenue that is not being received explicitly for having on-site fuel will be more explicitly valued. And it also will send revenue, hopefully, that will allow these units, if they're required to install like selective catalytic reduction, it gives them more compensation that they're not receiving now for many of the attributes that they're providing. MISO has probably the furthest along. They've identified 6 reliability attributes. Coal does provide 5 of those. MISO does realize that they still need fuel secure resources. They still need their coal fleet. They don't want to see the premature retirement, and neither do many of these other grid operators. And so they're looking at different ways to send market signals to retain units and to make sure that the units are being built have the attributes that are being needed. These were the, I mentioned the House Appropriations Amendment to stop the funding. I've mentioned the SPUR Act. We're also working to get draft bills in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and also that would also require reliability analysis. We've had a lot of support. It's hard to argue against putting reliability first. So we certainly feel hopeful that we could get something passed if permitting reform is able to be brought up, given we know many of the other issues that Congress is focusing on. The last thing I'll mention is we've started a new initiative called Dependable Power First. And it's really an initiative to raise awareness about the risk of reliability caused by the accelerated pace of dispatchable resources, why a megawatt of dispatchable resources is not the same as a megawatt of wind and solar. As we think about electrifying the economy, we think about all the data centers. Dominion Electric in Virginia, I live in Virginia, has had to turn away data centers because they don't have enough capacity. And so our opinion is we've got a lot of coal infrastructure already in place, already paid for. And so we need to take advantage of all resources and not eliminate any resources, especially as we try to electrify the economy. Also, there's certainly going to be a lot more discussion. The National American Energy Standards Board, which was created in about 2003, when gas began growing and becoming a larger part of the power generation market. Because of Storm Uri, the chairman of FERC basically charged NAESB with coming back with recommendations to avoid many of the issues. You know, this is the first time we've seen blackouts in Kentucky, the Carolinas. Certainly MISO was challenged. TVA experienced rolling blackouts. I was in Alabama. They came close as well during Storm Elliott. These 20 recommendations that they've come back with, I would say the main takeaway from that report, which was just sent to FERC last Friday, is that, you know, Houston, we've got a problem. The natural gas system, I have spent about 2 decades of my career on the natural gas side. It wasn't designed, it was designed for residential, commercial, industrial. So you had a lot of natural gas generation that was built, certainly when shale gas took off, where the infrastructure has not been able to keep pace. And so many of those recommendations they've been trying to solve, I would say, for the past 15 years. This group, the chairs who chaired the standards board, recommended that because the gas industry and the electric industry don't agree on these recommendations and couldn't come to a consensus on many of them are going to take a long time. In my opinion, some of them will be hard to ever achieve, but they're recommending that a gas RTO be stood up. So basically an equivalent of NERC for the gas industry, which many in the gas industry oppose, but it would require congressional action. And as we talk to state utility commissioners and FERC and policymakers, we're saying, hey, every additional coal plant that goes away, that's going to put more and more pressure on a system, a natural gas infrastructure system that already cannot meet the demand it has today as it relates to natural gas generation. If you guys, I'll send John the video that we put together. We felt like it would be difficult just because of the bandwidth of it to show it today. But John, I'm happy to send it to you. So I just want to leave you with, number one, we are always looking for ways to collaborate. We really appreciate John's support. John and I do communicate closely together. We do think that coal has been a reliable and affordable energy source for about 150 years. We think it is going to be needed for many decades to come. As I mentioned, we're certainly supportive of carbon capture and storage, although we all know it's going to take sustained investment and it's also going to take time. But we also realize that coal is essential to grid reliability, as I hope all of you will as well. And again, if we can provide any support, and I'm certainly happy to answer questions, John. Thank you.
Michelle, thank you for joining in too. That was a lot of really good information. We will run in the next issue of the digital newsletter On Track will be out next Thursday, and we'll run a link to that video in there so that everybody can see it. I've seen it before. It's very well done and a very good piece. So we'll put that out next week's On Track. Remind everybody, if you've got questions for Michelle, feel free to put them in the chat box, or else do the little raisey handy thingy that Zoom lets you do, and we'll get everybody recognized. Just to kick it off, though, Michelle did for a long time the grid operator, I don't want to call them sleepy, but they were kind of out of the public eye, the grid operators. And it appears to me that they're becoming a lot more vocal now. Is that a change in their operations?
No, it's a huge change, and we have spent a lot of time with them over the past 5 years. And I think they ultimately know. To me, state utility commissioners, grid operators, they're all going to be blamed if we don't keep the lights on. And I think they're at a point where they don't know how to solve the problem. Now we've been telling them, hey, these, I'd say 5 years ago, they weren't really concerned about the pace of coal retirements. They are now. But because these EPA regulations came on top of that, it takes years to do a market reform, and they don't have a lot of tools. They can't tell a utility, no, you can't retire that coal plant. I mean, they have these reliability must run agreements. But this is the first time that I've seen Jim Robb of NERC as well. I mean, they're going to have their own campaign. They're launching a campaign kind of like ours, reliability first. And so, they're trying to use the pulpit to really educate people. They're testifying before state legislatures. PJM testified before Kentucky. MISO is trying. They've added another staff, again, because they're kind of telling states, before you initiate these policies on decarbonization, please talk to us. Let us make sure that you understand the impacts on reliability. But that has been, to me, a huge shift.
A couple questions from our attendees. One is, can you summarize the recent litigation that's been filed up to this point? And as part of that, how do you define premature retirement of coal plants? I mean, what constitutes a premature retirement at this point?
Yeah, so we define a premature retirement as a coal plant that still has economic useful life. And so I'm going to give you an example. We have them that a lot of people say, well, all these coal plants, they're an average age of, 40 to 50 years. It isn't a time just to, retire. We have a member who has a coal plant that's 65 years old in Ohio, and that coal plant is still economic. Now, obviously, if he has to comply with the carbon rule and the ozone transport rule, it makes it very difficult to keep that plant open. But he testified in Congress, he has no other options. He's like, there's no way I can get a gas plant, or I can replace the fuel security of this plant, because he basically said we teetered on having a blackout during Storm Elliott, and thank goodness I still had my coal plant. So we define it as economic useful life. So we're seeing a lot of younger coal plants retire because utilities had, decarbonization goal. Illinois obviously has CEJA. So some of it is because of state goals, but a lot of it is because of the uncertainty with these EPA regulations.
And the litigation, of course, is playing out in a whole bunch of different ways, right? In district courts and at the federal level, and a whole bunch of different venues. I'll reform out the question that came in from the audience a little differently. How does America's Power determine which pieces of litigation that America's Power gets involved in? Because I'm sure you don't have a budget to be involved in every lawsuit that's happening in every venue.
So that's a great question. So we are prioritizing those EPA rules that we're going to get involved in litigation as it relates to the impact on the coal fleet. So the one with the largest impact certainly is the carbon rule. We certainly are preparing, because unfortunately we do not think EPA is going to do much to make that rule more flexible. And then the second one that has the largest impact is the ozone transport rule. The MATS rule was not as bad as we thought it would be right now, because the CCR rule and the ELG rule have not been finalized. We have not made a decision on those rules, but that is how we determine which ones are going to have the greatest impact on coal plant retirements.
Right. And Todd, you mentioned FERC before. I mean, what's the FERC's a more political animal than these grid regulators, right? I mean, what's the outlook for FERC engaging on this and being able to get anything done?
Well, the only thing that we were successful is Senator Barrasso and Capito, I'd say 2 months ago, they sent a letter to FERC saying, hey, we would like for you to hold a technical conference on the reliability impacts of the carbon rule. And surprisingly, because I'm from Alabama, so I know the chairman, Willie Phillips, he's actually a good guy. And so he has agreed that that technical conference is going to be November the 9th. But obviously these rules are very polarized, so in my opinion, it's going to be hard for FERC to do anything. But if they can at least serve, as a forum to highlight a lot of the issues, then we think certainly that's better than nothing.
Right. And you mentioned you had supplied a report to FERC last week. Is that online someplace where we can get it, or is that?
Well, it's the NASB, which is the Natural Gas Standards Board, which I will send to you guys. Even if you just read the first 2 pages, you'll get an idea of all of the challenges related to natural gas and just tremendous concerns. But I will also send you my FERC testimony, and it'll give you guys a good idea as it relates to some of these EPA rules, where they are, and also impact on reliability.
Awesome. That'd be great. And we'll make those materials available to folks who are interested. We'll publicize that in the On Track next week as well. Reminding everybody, if you've got questions for Michelle, go ahead and shoot them over on the chat board, or raise your hand so that we can recognize you. We've talked about the grid regulators and the FERC. I'll just ask this question bluntly. What about EPA? Are they just a lost cause at this point?
Yes, I think they are. I mean, we think they're so set on, you know, we need to achieve President Biden's decarbonization goal of 2035. That the only way they're going to get there is to implement these rules and obviously try to eliminate coal and eventually natural gas, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the expansion of natural gas now makes it all the more ridiculous. We go through all these rules come out and we go through the EPA public comment process, which I've described as kind of a little bit of kabuki theater, right? Because I'm not sure that they even bother to read them. But could you explain how those comments are important in terms of, getting information in the record for future litigation or future discussions with policymakers in Congress?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, we certainly provided robust comments, just so you guys know, there were over 1 million people. Now, many of those, were just kind of campaign people who wrote, a paragraph or a letter who submitted comments. There are probably about 600 substantive comments, trade associations, utilities, coal industry, manufacturers. We had a lot more allies that were opposed to the rule than we've had in the past because of the impact to coal and natural gas. Even the gas industry has filed a lot of comments as well. But yes, the comments and other people's comments, the grid operators' comments will be very helpful as we prepare for litigation. The FERC technical conference, it will also be something that we're certainly going to capture that testimony to incorporate into the litigation. You can't really do anything. You can't seek a motion to stay. A lot of my members have asked me until the rule is finalized. So we expect the carbon rule to be finalized by April, because again, they don't want the CRA and another administration to be able to overturn it. One of the things that a lot of people also brought up, not just us, and we're doing a paper, I'll send it to you, probably finish it today, on the highlights of the grid operator comments, which I think you guys will find interesting. I mean, they're pretty impactful, we only all had 70 days, so there was no time to do reliability analysis, the grid operators. I mean, some of EPA's been working on that rule for 18 months. So that's one of the arguments that we had. And that's why we're really saying, hey, Congress, you need to ensure that EPA does that analysis before this rule is finalized.
So the litigation on the carbon rule probably starts when they finalize the rule, probably next April, because they're trying to beat Congressional Review Act. Is litigation already started on the ozone transport stuff? And where is that playing out?
Yes. So we filed our motion. Now the states, there are 11 states who have been successful because EPA is a part, when they released the ozone transport rule, they also overturned the state implementation plans. So the states are also seeking motions to stay for the SIP, the state implementation plan. 11 of them, which is kind of unheard of, have been successful. So we can't believe that EPA has not withdrawn the rule, because all their analysis is based on, I mean, those are 11 are a part of the 30 states that are impacted. But obviously EPA is probably not going to do that. So we submitted, and there were 7 groups who submitted motion to stay on the litigation side last week. And so I think they have maybe 60 days to respond. And so we'll see what it has to go to the DC Circuit Court. It's unclear. It's pretty left-leaning court, but at least our attorneys are hopeful that we may be successful in seeking the motion stay, and then it would probably take a year to litigate it. If overturned, though, there are a lot of utilities who are also right now basing decisions to retire and build new on, because if you have to install an SCR on a coal plant, it's about $300 million, could be more. They would not have to make that capital investment. So that's why we're encouraging state utility commissioners, because of all the uncertainty with these rules, the uncertainty with certainly demand growth, electrification, let's just keep these units, until we really are confident there's technology out there to replace them. So we are working a lot with state utility commissioners as well.
Are the state utility commissioners mostly focused on cost of energy, or are they also getting tied into reliability now?
No, both. because, we've done a lot of polling. Most people don't know, who a grid operator is. The average person doesn't know what a grid operator is. And we kind of polled, who would you blame if obviously your lights go off? And all of them, the majority of them, the highest ranking was state utility commissioners. You saw what happened in Texas. They let them all go. So they are getting a lot more vocal as well. We spent a lot of time at NARUC, their National Association meeting. I was just on a panel with the CEO of MISO and the chair, the incoming president of NARUC, who all agreed that the pace is just not sustainable.
So on that issue, when the lights do go out, and frankly, I'm a little shocked. We read the headlines all the time about how the world's burning up, but from an energy perspective, this last summer has been nothing special. We kind of dodged the bullet again in a couple of key areas like PJM. I'm expecting, the lights are going to go out somewhere, sometime not too far in the future. When they do you think people are going to get it, or is the sort of the media machine already tuned up to say when the lights go out, well, that's because man-made climate change caused it to happen?
I mean, we're certainly going to hear that. But again, having voices like NERC, the grid operators, I mean, you've got two commissioners, Commissioner Danley and Commissioner Christie, who have both said, we are heading for a reliability crisis. And, FERC's rates, they're saying they're unjust and unreasonable because like you're paying to ensure when you flip the switch, your lights are on. And so people are paying for something that they're not getting, which we totally agree with the both of them. Certainly a new administration would be helpful, but, obviously nobody knows.
Yeah, if you could tell me how that one's going to come out, I really would appreciate it. We'll put a call out there for last questions because I'm about to spin my last one on Michelle here. If anybody else has anything they'd like to talk about, please put it in the chat box here shortly. I think you've heard me say this before, Michelle. My cynical outlook is that this EPA doesn't care that they put out 6+ rules that are illegal. I think they probably know that they're illegal, but they're going to push them out that way just to pursue the win by losing strategy. We don't care if it doesn't stand up in court. That's 6 years from now. If we can scare more utilities off the grid in the meantime, because they have to make decisions about things like gazillion-dollar SCRs and that sort of stuff, mission accomplished, because that's their goal here, is to not to protect the environment, but to shut down fossil fuels. Am I too cynical with that outlook?
No. I mean, we've talked to the grid operators and, they've said, Michelle, we meet with EPA. I mean, they didn't even understand the difference, megawatt of coal is not a megawatt. And they're not listening.
Right.
So, I mean, they're not driving the decision. I mean, obviously we know it's coming from Gina McCarthy on down. Even Regan, he's not making the decisions, the White House is. So unfortunately, that's why many of these rules are going to have to be litigated in the courts.
Yeah, I've told this story in a couple of settings, but it's true. There's an obscure office in the White House called the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. All regulations, not just EPA, but all regulations have to go through that office for a final check to make sure it's in sync with administration policy and other departments don't have problems with it. It used to be the place of last resort where you could go and maybe try to inject some insanity or some sanity into a rule that's coming out of EPA or someplace. But lately it's gone to back up what Michelle was talking about. It's gone the other direction. On the carbon rule, OIRA refused to take meetings with industry folks. And when EPA sent their first draft over, the White House sent it back and told them to make it worse.
No, I know.
So,
include gas, it's like, well, let's include gas, now.
Yeah, so it's really kind of crazy. So one other question from the group here, Michelle, is there a plan, assuming we get regime change and there's a new administration in a couple of years, is there a plan in place to help that new administration hit the ground running? Here are the actions you need to take to return the grid to a reliable status, that sort of thing? Are we able to think that far ahead?
Yeah, no, we are. So we're looking at several different legislative ideas. Also, obviously, the CRA would be the best tool because that would pause and send back to the new EPA the carbon rule. But there's a lot of other opportunities that an administration who is reasonable to all fossil fuels and certainly all resources that could be done. And we're certainly looking at of all those. And I would say the biggest tool we have right now is the AGs have really been energized. And so they are litigating all of these rules. Certainly they have a lot of resources, but their success on the ozone transport rule has energized them even more.
And just to close the loop on that one, their success has mainly been in the circuit courts, right?
Yes.
The local courts. Challenging EPA at the DC Court of Appeals is tough because it's so liberal. But these other entities have a chance to do things in the other courts that work. Is that correct?
Right, and the 21, General Morsi will be leading the charge on the carbon rule. He's the AG running for governor in West Virginia. And so he will be involved. They already sent a letter, the 21 states, pretty strong letter to EPA, getting ready for the litigation on the carbon rule as well. They just sent it out this week, I think.
That's outstanding. So, well, that's it. Michelle, anything else you'd like to add? You got a friendly audience here and we're all on the same team, I think. So
I think just that you guys can also be a voice. We need a lot more reasonable voices. The transportation sector, certainly as it relates to rail or to barge, it is very important. It's what makes coal fuel secure. But I think your sector having a voice, it's not like you have to be the voice of coal, but you do need to be the voice of dependable power first. And so anything that you guys can do to help, whether that's opinion pieces or obviously you talk to state legislators, you guys talk to Congress. I'm happy to give you information, weave in some of the things as it relates to reliability. That would be extremely helpful. And you guys have relationships in the states as well.
Thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity to help Michelle. And please don't be shy about reaching out to us if there's anything at all that you think the transportation sector here can help with. So,
okay, will do. And thanks again.
Yeah, thanks again to Michelle for taking time out of her very busy schedule to be with us here. Melinda, do you have anything else you need to add before we break up? Good, Melinda's giving me the high sign, so we appreciate everybody being here today. Again, we will skip the webinar in September. We'd rather see you in Colorado Springs, but we'll be back with another special guest in October and through the end of the year. So thank you again, Michelle. Really appreciate you pitching in here.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.